Welcome to the Black Writer Studio, a podcast presented by the Hurston Wright Foundation and hosted by Dr. Khadijah Ali Coleman. The Black Writer Studio is dedicated to showcasing Black writers who are transforming the world today with their literary pen and creating a legacy for the culture. Hoke S. Glover, also known as Brother Yao, is a poet, author, and businessman. He co-founded Karibu Books in 1992, the leading African-American bookstore in the country, until 2008. Brother Yao is currently a professor and chair of the Language, Literature, and Cultural Studies Department at Bowie State University. Efua Prince is the author of Burnin Down the House, Daughters Exchange, and numerous essays including the award-winning June. She is an associate professor of African American Studies at Bowie State University. Both poets join us in the Black Writer Studio today to talk about their forthcoming book, Crazy as Hell. So first of all, I'd like to say that it's so great to have you. Fun fact that folks probably don't realize about Brother Yao, also known as Hoke Glover, is that you are a former board member of the Hurston Wright Foundation, right?
I am. I am
Yes.
many years right at the beginning. You guys are so old now
Oh, yes,
that
we
I
are.
was young when when I did it, or you guys were young when I did it. But yeah, yeah,
Well,
I
I
love Hurston Wright.
wasn't with the organization, so you have history with the Hurston Wright Foundation that I don't have. But one of the things that I'm really pleased to see when I think about the history of the Hurston Wright Foundation is just the tentacles that stretch out and reach across so many. There's so many incredible Black literary artists who are associated with this organization. And so to be in conversation with the two of you today, to talk about your forthcoming book, is just a privilege. And so I just wanted to put it on the radar for our listeners who are listening and checking in that this isn't your first rodeo with the Hurston Wright Foundation. But
it is not.
Right, but we have gathered today to talk about this collaboration between you and Efua on this book known as Crazy as Hell. So it'll be dropping this summer. This book has already been reviewed and received blurbs of high praise from folks like Kwame Alexander, Tony Medina, yours truly, right? But our
Yes,
listeners
ma'am.
want to know, where on earth did you both get the idea, and how did you two come up with this idea, as both of you are really creative writers? So can you tell me a little bit about the history of this book that we're about to dig in and talk about?
You
Okay,
want me
yeah,
to start?
I'll let her forward talk.
Oh, you want me to start?
Yes, ma'am.
Ladies first.
Okay. Well, I mean, we've been having an ongoing conversation for like, I don't know how many years, decades, more than a decade. But when the pandemic hit is when we started actually writing this down. It was like March 2020, and we were in the house. We were all in the house. The whole world was at home. And so we just talked to each other, and we started writing down some of the things we had been grappling with in terms of ideas of how you think about our history, Black history, Black culture. And we started changing the tone. We were like, it's crazy as hell. And then we said it a different way, that's crazy as hell. And the more we changed the tone, the more we realized we were talking about slightly different things. And we began to organize it. And it was kind of quick work because we had been having a conversation for so long that when we started to write it down, it came pretty quickly. So
Give us some context as to, first of all, the two of you are not teaching at the same institutions. Can you give us some context as to where you both are in terms of, this is the pandemic, you're at home. Where are you in terms of proximity to each other?
yeah, we for a while we did work at the same institution. I met him Formerly met him at Bowie State University, where he was a professor and I joined the faculty. What year was that?
2010 or
29.
29.
Yeah, 2009, I joined the faculty, and that's where we met. But I had gone by then, and I've been at two different institutions since then. But now I'm on faculty at Wayne State University in Detroit. But I split my time between Detroit and Maryland. So physically, I'm apart, but we been in communication since joining the faculty. Basically, we started this conversation I'm alluding to around 2010. We started talking about some of the ideas. We read each other's writing, and that's how we started discussing a lot of the ideas that manifested as Crazy as Hell.
I love the fact that even though you had this starting point of your relationship in the same place, this conversation still continued even as you left and you're now in different spaces. Tell me how the both of you started having a conversation about history, though, as both of you being creative writers. Was there a particular reason that you started to manifest this idea as opposed to maybe doing a collaborative piece around poetry or something more aligned with the type of work that you have historically done?
You want to talk about that book that you read, you encountered at the barbershop, or was it at the barbershop? Where was that book? You know which one?
Actually, I mean, that is an interesting sort of inroad, but I had actually, I was doing some work here at Bowie, and I ran into a guy. Actually, I can't see so bad. I got to put my glasses on.
It sounds like me.
But I had an interaction with a guy, Castile. Ooh, and I forget his first name. But with my book selling history, I'm always talking to people about books, and he's like, "Man, I got this book." I'm like, "What's the book?" And he's like, "Oh, this book is called Man Law." And so he wrote this really short book called Man Law. It's only about 150 pages, and it's only got maybe it's only got maybe 2 or 3 lines almost on every page. Really simple book. And, was designed to teach African-American men about, like particular laws they have for like how they handle their business. And so I was like, man, I said, that's a serious idea, and I was like, give me some copies of the book. So he gives me copies of the book. And then we got Free Black Space, which is a blog that I ran for 10 years. And Dr. Prince and I published a lot. Dwayne, who wrote the introduction, was right there at the beginning, early on. But, the motto of Free Black Space is barbershops and salons and Black bookstores. Is where the sophisticated intellectual conversations that African-American people have, with one another occur. And really important for us, just as writers, creative writers who work in academia, to get at that root of where African Americans have intellectual exchange and discourse and address who we are and what we're thinking with nuance outside academia. And really important in terms of Free Black spaces in the absence of white folks, that, I mean, I would argue, I've been studying entanglement lately, and, like, white folks like entanglement, man. A Black person is thinking a certain way or wants to say a certain thing. You put them in a position where they're observed by white folks. They like the electron. You don't know if they're negative or positive. The actual charge of the energy changes. And so Free Black space is fundamentally about those conversations, again, which occurred during slavery, in the absence of masters and all of that, are the place where we really think about the world and are most sophisticated as we discuss it. So my son worked at a barbershop, and actually is a barbershop that's owned by a dude that wrote a couple of urban fiction books for HarperCollins.
Oh, wow.
We were talking about him the other day. This guy is sold, like, I think I talked to him yesterday, yesterday, and he had sold like 90,000 copies of his book. But he sold like 30,000 of them on his own, so really sophisticated guy. So I got the copies of the book, and had him take him to the barbershop. And here's the magic moment. Within a week and a half, everybody had read the book because it's so short. But not only that, but the book had made its way into the culture of the barbershop. So as people would joke with each other and talk with each other, they'd be like, yo, come on, man. You know, like the man law, Jones, such, 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 such. And so I was like,
Wow.
that's the book I want to write. I want to write the book. It's absolutely infectious. It's about hand selling. It's so related to the culture. It's so short that people comprehend it, they get it, and then almost immediately they can turn around and be like, and I mean, and people will do that when they read this book. I mean, they just be like, oh yeah, crazy as hell. I mean, like we're having conversations. Like I had a conversation with Dwayne, and I was joking with him, and I said, yo, man, I said, because Dwayne's in the book. He has an entry in the book, but I was like, yo, you really are crazy as hell, man.
Yeah.
I'm like, that's why you deserve to be in the book. But you know, it's these primary metaphors. And you know, I do a lot of I Ching work. And so, you know, in the I Ching, it's earth, water, fire, wind, moon, heaven, mountain, thunder. I think that's most of them, but 8 sort of primary. The way to look at the I Ching is 8 primary metaphors that discuss the complexity of what it means to be a human.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing, we're not even a human, but just to be here in the universe. And then the other thing is they are lowest common denominators. So there's another important idea, which is that metaphors exist on all of these different levels, but truly metaphors which are connected to sensory perception are reconciled on the lowest level by things that actually exist in nature. So, you know, creative writers, we get into, you know, the language, and we're talking about, I mean, how do you connect that to a sensory experience?
Mm-hmm.
And so Dr. Prince and I mean, again, before we get to Crazy as Hell, we spent, I mean, at least a good 6 or 7 years doing more complex studies of metaphor and developing a series of modes where we could teach our students. She did it, I did it on the poetry side, but she did it, she had this amazing, fascinating method of reducing or almost like factoring. So, you know, if you get something like sugar, like if we're talking about colonialism,
Mm-hmm.
and then we're talking about sugar,
Mm-hmm.
we're talking about tea,
Mm-hmm.
or molasses,
Mm-hmm.
or rum, right? That when we get to these particular ideas, part of what she was working with her classes on was working backwards and saying, how do we take these complex ideas and then factor them down to the sensory perceptions that people encounter when the world changes and shifts in these ways, and how do we get to that sort of core, again, metaphorical experience. So I think those are the two things about Crazy as Hell.
That sounds like a whole new field of study, because it reminds me of you hear it commonly when you talk about local, like farm to table, and looking, or even an ecosystem in science from that background. But you are talking from a historical perspective, but with items, with thought, with ideas, and then breaking them down, factoring them down, which factoring in itself is a math concept. So it's like this amalgamation of all of these disciplines, all of these things that have gone into this book. And I appreciate you breaking it down to the genesis regarding you all's conversation. But even when we start talking about the book, and my initial question, you know, as creative writers, this is a history book, but you, in your explanation, it's much more than that. It's a work of creative writing. It's a work of philosophy. It's a work of, even outside of history, it is still addressing culture, which would be anthropological in a sense. So with all of the all of this going into this, and I think even in our conversation months back, when I was taking a look at the book, I even think I said I could even see this adapting into something outside of book form, and becoming something different in itself. So that's a lot. So tell me, I'm very curious, because the book comes out in June, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
What are some of the the ways you mentioned the barbershop, but what are some other goals do you have for this book in terms of how it greets the world? Where do you want to see it land? Who is the intended audience for this? Because this is something that I don't necessarily see. It's really settling in an academic sense. Who are some of these audiences that you've kind of determined for this book?
Well, I think this is a broad book. I mean, when we wrote it, again, all of this philosophy, we were like, how do we congeal it into a form that is easily digestible, easily recognizable, easily understood?
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes when I start writing words on the page, I write like I have a PhD. And that's not what we were going for. And sometimes things started there, but that's not where we ended because that's not, we were trying to get to the root.
Mm-hmm.
And so the metaphor that Brother Yao was just talking about takes us back to our senses. So when we get to the senses, we're talking about everybody has them. So the audience on one level is for what do Black people need to hear or want to hear that they recognize, they understand, and affirms their experiences without feeling like somebody's surveilling them, somebody's looking over their shoulder, feeling like they got to lean in and whisper. We are talking freely out loud amongst ourselves, but it's not limited to that. We've had a lot of, how many you think we had? About 100, 150
Yeah, we
readers?
had quite a few readers. It was, I think it was over 100.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
it's a lot of readers, and they're not all African American.
Mm-hmm.
And we get interesting responses. So the audience, I think, is very broad. We wrote it without apology.
Mm-hmm.
We
Mm-hmm.
were ourselves at
Mm-hmm.
our root.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the market is very broad. I think people can pick this book up from a whole lot of places, and it's not that everybody absolutely loved the book, but most people responded in a way like Brother Yao was saying, when they read it, they were immediately adopting it they were like, you know what? Y'all missed this. Y'all missed that. And it's like, no, we're not trying to be comprehensive. We're trying to see if you can get our point. And you
Mm-hmm.
got our point.
Mm-hmm. 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 That's fantastic because I am thinking of this landscape that exists right now where you have a book like Michael Harriot's book, Black AF History, being a bestseller in a world where we are having book bannings, right?
Mhm.
And and people really trying to distort or restrict what is being told about the history that includes Black people as being other than peripheral characters. Tell me what considerations were taken into account, knowing what's happening right now with book banning, knowing that this is a timely issue, a book coming out about Black history. What are some of the I guess the responses from your readers? Were there any that were taken into consideration our current climate?
I think this thing I'd say about current climate, and for me, it just sort of goes back to, the I Ching, is that, I think my reading of Black history is that it's fundamentally cyclical, and
Mm-hmm.
that for the serious student of Black history, uh, the goal really is to study so that you can learn to see the nuance of the patterns of our relationship to this country. And
Mm.
so in that way, and it sounds really lofty, but my 2 cents is that transcendence of time, not about the time. That the issue with African American consciousness and literature, if you look at it, is that it trends into the same pattern systematically every 30 or 40 years. And those trends, if you're dealing with Wright and Black Boy, or the most famous one would be, you know, Ta-Nehisi Coates' Between the World and Me is a remix of James Baldwin's A Fire Next Time. And not simply a remix, and this is a new iteration in African American history, not simply a remix that comes out of the developing consciousness of the writer, but in some ways, the pivot on Baldwin and the connection to Morrison is actually an iterative pattern that is designed by industry. And so fundamentally, my reading of African American literature is nobody else in the world has a literature that is so predominantly edited by the people who appear to be their angst. We have serious questions about whether it really is literature. I mean, because we're powerless. We don't own the publication companies. So in this case, and this is part of like that idea archetypes that exists within the book, that the idea archetypes within the book begin to suggest that pattern. And then the other thing is that the buzzwords that are used to show wherever we are trending. So there's no DEI in the book. White supremacy gets said like once. There's no Black Lives Matter. And it's not like we were thinking about that. Part of what happened is we were thinking about these patterns. And in this tiny little structure, in this tiny little book, we linked together the particular people. And so I think one of the things that, and I mean, it's an experiment. You know, I say the book is STEM, and this is the app for a whole series of calculations. But I think Black people respond to that, you know, with that question about audience, you know, is that there's this freedom that you get when you read the book, that you don't have to do the thing that most intellectual Blacks do, which is tell you the buzzwords, who it is they were studying with, how it is. Like, you literally have to learn something to be able to decode Black history, because Black intellectuals are always trending into like some new pattern. Like they invented something that has to do with Black oppression when everybody Black is still oppressed, like they were in the generations before. And so the book frees you from that. I mean, and you got the humor there, but the first thing it does is it frees you from that sort of monotony that you experience every time you get to a Black history book. You get to a Black history book, why are you reading it? Usually it's supposed to be that you're going to learn something about Black people that you don't already know, when in fact you are Black. So there's a huge contradiction there, because you feel like you know yourself, or you know enough to be able to talk about it. The voice that exists in the book is the voice of the Black witness that does that. So hell yeah, we know, man, that nigga crazy as hell. Right? I mean, like, that's what it is. Like, and that's who you're talking to when you talk about Black history. But the way that discourse is managed in this country is that people, it's like, you know, again, we do it with the phone. Man, what's going on? Oh, hello. Like, we change our tone when we're engaging certain things in a formal way. And Black history is just like everything else. So when we talk about Black history, we get a little pompous, we get a little nostalgic, we straighten up our back. But then after that, in the free Black space, we'd be like, man, yo, that dude is crazy, man. I mean, and if it's his hustle that he go to Harvard, and I heard he got like $80 million or $100 million and he's studying, I mean, more power to him, because Black people need to do what they're doing. But on another level, man, some of that stuff he was saying, man, he's crazy as hell. It's crazy as hell.
It's so interesting, because I feel like that has come up at least 3 times in our conversation, this idea of code switching. You know, when Dr. Prince talks about, you know, she writes as if she has a PhD. She does, right? But the understanding that we have these selves, these different selves in our one body, because we have to navigate a terrain that's often so violent, often so misrepresentative of who we are. It sounds like this book has intentionally said enough with the code switching, and this is who we are. And what I find interesting is that hearing you kind of say that that's what this is. This is the space where it's no code switching, that this is who we are, like we're showing up in our full selves, how we would be in discourse with one another without the gaze, the white gaze, and all of these expectations that people have for us. But I think of my review of the book and the other reviews that I've read that you all have shared, in saying that we are saying is hilarious as hell, that is genius, and that it's all of these things, when in fact what you're saying is that it's us full throttle without the code switching. And I think that you know, I just want to acknowledge that and bring to the fore, because what we're essentially saying is that you are being our hilarious, you are representing Black people in their hilarious self, where it may be, the tall tales that are happening when we're on the porch talking, that Zora writes about, in her folk writing, that it's all of that and then some. As we close, I want you to share the full title of the book. I want you to tell when it's dropping and where folks can pick this book up when it becomes available.
Well, the
Okay,
full
and let me
title.
let,
Go ahead.
let me just add one more thing because I think it's important, is the fact that the book pivots on Reginald Dwayne Betts. This book doesn't get published without him. And that Dwayne, as I called him, but as we all are, is crazy as hell. And he spent time in prison, and he's very rooted. He has remained rooted. I mean, he goes to prison.
Yeah.
I mean, every month he spends some time in a facility, maybe 3 or 4 times. That's the real pivot there too,
Yeah.
which is that he has this consciousness that's Yale Law School, educated, spent time at Harvard and done all these other things, but he's so rooted to everyday Black people who, he's over here, but he's rooted to this existence. And so without him sort of seeing and connecting with that in the book, it doesn't get published. But I think that's another important idea about like who we are. And I think Dwayne is a really great example of the awesome bandwidth of who we are,
I appreciate
I know. I'm glad you mentioned that. We would be remiss not to acknowledge that, because initially we were like, we're gonna publish this thing out our trunk masterpiece style on some newsprint. But Dwayne came, as he saw the copy and he saw a vision for it, and he is why it is in the form that it is today. And the full title of it is Crazy as Hell: The Best Little Guide to Black History. It's not meant to be comprehensive. It is meant to be a guide. And it is available pre-order now. You can pre-order it from wherever you like to buy your books. And it will be released on June 4th, just in time for the Juneteenth holiday.
Yes. Do you have any special events planned for it right now, as of right now?
We have a signing. Our DC launch will be at Sankofa, and I'd have to go and find that exact date, and then we're working with the 15th. Okay, and then we're working with Mahogany Books to do something at the National Harbor on the 19th. And I think we're just there right now. We wanted to, Sankofa is just this, great. Holly and Sharikiana are, my role models as Black bookstore activists. I think one of the most serious games in the country. I'll claim them as the most serious. And then Derek and Ramonda, just excellent booksellers, and an extension of the Karibu family, because they both work for us. So just starting out with Black folks we love and know. And the other thing that I really want to think about doing, but I'll just say it here because it's recorded, but I'm also thinking about like maybe a Karibu family reunion event, just call out people
You heard it here first.
Yeah, we just gotta, I just gotta see if I got the energy to do that. But just, this book comes out of, that's the other thing is, the hidden sort of juju in this is, I owned a Black bookstore for a long time. And so, all those elements of design are about Black people thinking scientifically about the book. And I think the next level is that we can innovate in books the same way we have in music.
Yes.
And it's unquestionable that hip hop and jazz and blues are beyond Western culture. Yeah. And there's a way with the book, we always seem to be underneath it.
Yeah.
I'm not sure. We play around with it and we suggest that, but I think there's this way where, we can be innovative. And that Chinese book that's 5,000 years old has everything to do with this book. And that book is written in a way that defies what the book is in Western culture. Like, white people don't write books like the I Ching. Yeah. The closest you get to that is like Einstein and all of them creating this sophisticated map of math that explains how phenomena operate. So, it's just wide open for African Americans. We live in the most powerful country in the world for many, many years, and we have access to all these things, but at the same time, we are the angst. We can metaphorically represent the worst. And so, I mean, that's almost like being cursed and blessed at the same time, Taoism. And so it's just wide open for us. We can bring things to the table that nobody else does. And that's the way, you know, we look at Crazy as Hell, you know. Who else is going to do this?
I think that's a perfect sell for the book, but I think that's also, I feel that this interview has kind of is inverted in a way, because we end with you talking about a possible Karibu reunion, where we didn't start with talking about your history as being a bookseller, you know, starting one of the most popular bookstore franchises, you know, that existed during this time, but to see your evolution from being a bookseller to now a scholar to now working with Dr. Prince, being an artist, you know, a literary artist, to now this scholar who now is introducing history in this dynamic form. I think that in itself is really revolutionary to see as well, is that we're always in a state of that. Doesn't necessarily mean we are static beings. And I get a lot of that from reading the book, is that it really speaks to the many expressions of Blackness that exist through a historical, but also an artistic lens. And so I'm really excited about this book that you all have. I'm excited for both of you. I'm thankful that you both were here in the Black Writers Studio to share a bit. And I look forward to really seeing the success that evolves from this book, and additional feedback that you'll get from the readers once it's released. So thank you, and happy Friday.
Yeah. And thank you. We were first here. I think this is the first time Dr. Prince and I have talked publicly. So it's like to do that with Hurston Wright is timely, beautiful, and you know, appropriate. You know, it's everything. Yep.
Oh, that's wonderful.